I don't make any sense. I take my sweater off because it's too warm, and then I'm freezing, so now I'm drinking tea. Whatever, it's fine. Hi guys, I'm Amy. Welcome back to my channel. Today I have a reading wrap up for all of you. These are the last 5 books that I read, and it's kind of a little bit of everything. So if you're interested to hear what I thought about them, then go ahead and keep on watching. We'll start with the book that was definitely the worst of this bunch, and I feel like I need to preface this by saying I had probably low expectations of this book going into it. I didn't anticipate this being anything like phenomenal or amazing. I was just looking for something that was a little bit escapist, and it really shocked me by how bad it was. And that book is Changeling, book 1 of the Order of Darkness series by Philippa Gregory. I'm sure most of you know her as the author of The Other Boleyn Girl. She writes a lot of fictional stories about King Henry VIII's wives. You guys know, I don't need to tell you. And I didn't even know that she wrote YA fantasy books until I stumbled across this book at a thrift shop. And it's really short, and I was like, why not? Let's give it a go. And that's exactly why I picked it up. Fantasy, YA, and very short. Just like a quick, get it done type of read. And it was so bad, guys. It was so bad. So the premise of this story, we have 2 main characters. Luca is 17. He, since the age of 11, has been training to become a priest, but when he starts questioning things and kind of using his brain a little bit too much for the Catholic Church, he gets in a little bit of trouble, but ends up, because of this happening, being appointed as an investigator for the Roman Catholic Church, investigating weird paranormal magical instances across the kingdom, and is allowed to make judgments on behalf of the church. And I didn't mention the year is 1453. So we're talking like medieval times, and we're in Italy throughout the entirety of this book. And so he goes off to investigate these weird instances that are happening and decide what's going on. Our other main character is Isolde. She's also 17. She's recently lost her father, who was the lord of this Italian estate, and learns, and was unaware of this before he died, that either she has to marry this really vile, horrible guy, or she can become the lady abbess of the nunnery that's on their lands. And so she decides to become an abbess, but doesn't really want to. And when she shows up, these weird things start happening to the nuns, weird dreams, hallucinations, sleepwalking, and they keep getting these wounds in the middle of the night that like mimic Jesus's I don't know if I said that right. That just sounds totally wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's right. Wounds from his crucifixion. So Luca shows up to find out what's happening, and that's where this book goes from there, and that's how these 2 characters meet. There are so many plot holes that I'm shocked that this is in a first draft. Like, there are so many things that just kind of get left and you never return to it, and then the mystery is very, very obvious from the second they reveal even the tiniest thing. It's just ridiculous. And there's so many points where you think this book is gonna end, but then it just keeps going, which is so weird because it's so short. I mean, I can't say that the writing was bad, but it wasn't good. It just was fine, but it was terrible. Oh my gosh, it was so terrible. And I just kind of kept reading it because I was shocked that it just somehow kept getting worse. So, needless to say, I will not be continuing with this book series, and you should probably skip it if you were thinking about reading it, or I would advise that because it's just real bad. I was hankering for another short read, and so I decided to pick up, as I throw the book at myself, Another Brooklyn by Jacqueline Woodson. Many of you will know her as the author of Brown Girl Dreaming, which is a middle grade book. And to my knowledge, this is the only or one of very few books that she has written for adults. And in this story, we are following an African-American woman named August. just blanked there for a second, who grows up in Brooklyn. And specifically, this is about her growing up without a mother and her anticipating her mother to show up in Brooklyn because they moved from a country town in Nashville. Her father moved her and her younger brother to Brooklyn. And so we're following the fact that she's a motherless girl waiting every day for her mother, but also the relationship that she cultivates with 3 other girls in Brooklyn and how pivotal this relationship became to August. Because this is one of those stories that's framed by the fact that the story starts out, August is an adult woman. She's working as an anthropologist, I cannot speak, an anthropologist, and returns to Brooklyn for her father's funeral. And then she sees one of her childhood friends that she was so very close with. And then she kind of like looks back on what it was like to grow up in Brooklyn. So the main part of the story, you are growing up with these girls from the ages about 9 to about 18. And I was really, really astounded by this story and how much Woodson accomplishes in such a tiny book. And I also need to mention, like, this book is written in like little kind of vignettes, sort of, in a very similar style to Brown Girl Dreaming that I find very successful and make for such a fast, quick read. And I really, really enjoyed that. I love her writing style. She has this tendency, I don't want to say habit because habit sounds bad, to like repeat these words or phrases that just really drive home the point of whatever it is she's trying to get across, or just that like intense emotion that our character is experiencing at the time. And the discussions in this book about identity and what it means to be a woman and to grow up with these stereotypes and these ideas that people put on you of what you are and what you should be and how you deal with that are just really, really great. Like, it's just such a huge punch in such a little book. I want to put out there trigger warning for sexual assault, but I really enjoyed this. And the more time I've spent away from it, the more I've found myself thinking about it and really, really appreciating my reading experience of this book. So I definitely recommend if you're looking for something that's a little bit shorter and quicker with just really lyrical, beautiful writing, but all with the backdrop of this topic of just really tough, difficult things. I keep blinding all of you with this book, I'm sorry, about growing up as a female in a city that's not always so forgiving, but while celebrating female friendships, but also how difficult they can be. Did I say enough about this book? I should probably stop, but check it out if you haven't read it. I definitely recommend it. I finally got around to reading a booktube darling. I feel like everyone has read this book, that I'm the last one to read it, and I was so excited to read it. And my reading experience of it was really, really interesting. And that book is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I'm sure most of you are familiar with this story, or at least have some idea of what this book is about. In this story, our main character is Dana. She's a 26-year-old African-American woman who's married to an older white man, and they have just moved into a new home. I believe the present time in this story is like the 70s. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Dana is pulled out of the present day into the antebellum South, where she saves a young white boy. And after this event, she comes back and she's covered in mud, and her husband doesn't know where she went, and she was only gone for a few seconds. But as the story continues, she keeps getting pulled back in time, having to save this little boy, Rufus's life. And each time she goes back, she's there longer and longer. And what is really interesting is that Dana quickly figures out that Rufus is one of her ancestors. So she has to save him if she's going to exist in the present day. And I think that this book is so interesting. That concept is really interesting because Dana is an African-American woman from the present day, let's say, who doesn't fit in the antebellum South. She's opinionated and she looks people in the eye and she's proud of who she is, and that doesn't work in the antebellum South for obvious reasons. And you also learn that Rufus is the son of a slave owner. So this whole story sets up this opportunity to have a discussion about slavery, about the relationship between the master and the slaves, and how that relationship is not so cut and dry, how it's really complicated and there's a lot of layers to it. And I really, really appreciated that. That's where I think this book shines, in the deep dive into that relationship, into the institution of slavery and what it meant for the slaves and what it meant for the owners of the slaves and society, and how that was so permeated into their very core. And that was so well done. And I really enjoyed that. But I have to say that I was very disappointed in what I feel was like a lack of character development and growth. Dana's pretty much Dana throughout this whole story. Yes, she changes and she learns things, but who she is at the beginning and what she values, I find to be the very same at the end of this book. And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, but I have to say, when I read, I'm looking for really great character development, and this book just didn't have that. This book is a plot-based book. It's all about the plot. It's all about Dana being transported in time to save Rufus, who's not always the best of characters or boys, as you can probably imagine. And that disappointed me, because that is a personal preference of mine. And I will say that if you are a person who reads books for the plot, then this book is absolutely for you, and I think it's a good book. But I was a little bit disappointed, if I have to be honest. But like I said, the discussion about the relationship between masters and slaves I found to be fascinating and really successfully done, and for that reason I do think that you should check it out. But if you're looking for something that's like a deep dive into a character, definitely not the book to read. I saved my two favorite books of this bunch for last, because I just like to save the best for last, you know what I mean? And I finally got around to reading Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore by Robin Sloan. If you guys have been with me for a while now, you will have known that about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago, I guess it's a year and a half, not almost two. A year and a half ago, I read Sourdough by Robin Sloan, which is his second book, and this is his debut. And I loved Sourdough so much. I thought it was a fantastic book. And when, you know, all this stuff has been happening with COVID and self-isolation, and the world just has been flipped on its head, and it's not the happiest of places, I would say, I decided to pick this book up because I was really hoping to get the same vibes that I got from Sourdough from this book. And let me tell you what, Robin Sloan delivered, because this book was such a blast. Oh my gosh, I loved it from the very first page to the very last page. So if you don't know, this is the story of a young man, he's like in his early 20s, named Clay, who lives in San Francisco and has recently been laid off from his job, as Loki is sitting in the weirdest position right now. Hold on, I'm gonna flip you around because I don't even know what's happening, and then we'll get back to the book. Is that comfortable? That couldn't have been comfortable. Oh, you're not gonna do it now that I flip the camera around? Okay. Fair enough. Don't bark at those kids. Back to the book. Clay has recently been laid off from his job as a graphic designer and marketer for a small startup company, and finds himself looking for work and ends up in a position as the night clerk for Mr. Penumbra's 24-Hour Bookstore. But Clay very quickly figures out that there's more to this bookstore than you would typically assume a bookstore would have happening, because very, very few people come in and actually buy books. And only the very front of this bookstore has typical books. The rest of the store, which is like stories and stories high, like these bookshelves are like crazy tall, are filled with these books that he refers to as the Wayback List, which are books that have these weird hieroglyphic writings in them. And these people, the same people over and over again at all hours of the night, come in and check out these books. And as Clay dives into what exactly is going on and what is happening, and calls on the resources of his friends, who he has this wonderful group of friends. He has a friend who owns a tech company and is like a millionaire, another friend who is a special effects artist for Hollywood, and he meets this girl who works for Google and is a programmer, and through these interactions, they deep dive into what exactly is happening at Mr. Penumbra's 24-hour bookstore. And the book takes off from there. But Robin Sloan's writing is so playful and so fun. This is a celebration of nerdiness and technology, but also setting up for the discussion of technology versus old knowledge in books and what that means for the future when everything is on the internet and everything is computerized. And I just was so charmed by this book. I loved it so much. There's wonderful messages in this story, wonderful discussions about immortality and, like I said, technology and old knowledge and books and what the future is going to look like. I highly recommend it, especially right now if you're looking for a lighter read. Check it out because this book is just great. It was exactly what I needed, and I feel like a lot of people might feel that way. So if you're looking for something that's fun and quirky but still has some meat on its bones, then definitely check this one out. And the last book of the bunch that I have to share with you, I freaking adored. I adored this book so much. Like, I couldn't put it down. And that was Swimming Lessons by Claire Fuller. You guys know that I read Bitter Orange last summer for the BookTube Prize and freaking loved it, anticipating not liking it at all. And when I found this at my local used bookstore, I had to bring it home. And I decided to pick it up and read it, and it did not disappoint. The tension in this book is set up from page 1. So the whole premise of this story is that Ingrid is a wife and a mom, and she starts writing letters in the middle of the night to her husband, Gil, and puts them, when she's finished them, into his collection of books that he has, this huge collection of books. And then she disappears, and many people assume that she died, that she drowned in the ocean where she would go swimming a lot. And then So that's one half of the book, and the other half of the book takes place after Gil, her husband, 15 years after her disappearance, is convinced that he saw her outside of his favorite bookstore in his hometown. And when he has an accident, his daughters, Nan and Flora, show up to take care of him at his home on the beach. And our main point of view character in that time frame is Flora, the younger daughter, who has never believed that her mother is actually dead. And in these letters from Ingrid, she's telling you the story of how she met Gil, how their relationship progressed, and all the things that happened that led up to her disappearance. And in the present day, you're dealing with the ramifications of her disappearance, of her daughters, who one takes care of everybody and is a responsible one, and then Flora, who's just really adrift and not really sure what's happening. And this book was phenomenal. The writing is spot on, the descriptions are beautiful, this backdrop of this British beach with, the storms and the waves and the ocean, and it's just a really, really stunning, captivating book that you can't put down. And I absolutely adored it. I marked it up one side, down the other. If you read Bitter Orange and liked it, then I definitely recommend this one. I don't know that I liked it as much as Bitter Orange, but it is a close second. It's phenomenally written, and it's a beautifully tragic story. So I feel like I need to put it out there that this is not necessarily a happy read, but such a compelling, fascinating look at a marriage and motherhood and identity and how all of this gets wrapped up into this story. And I mean, you gotta read this one, guys. It's so good. And the cover is beautiful. All right, guys, there you have it. There are my most recent reads. If you guys have read any of them, please let me know your thoughts down below. If you agreed, if you disagreed, if you just found the book to be kind of meh. I would love to know your thoughts, or if you want to read any of them now, please let me know that as well. If you guys like this video, please like it, and if you loved it, please subscribe, and we will see you in my next video. Happy reading! Cow, careful with the plant, bud. You're like crushing it. Shall I move this while you sit in that chair? Does that make you feel better? Is that better? Be easy with the planties, bud. Let's just get the worst one of the bunch out of the way. Do I need to move that plant too?